Hi, I'm Judith Cassel-Mamet. I want to show you another technique that I use for adventure journaling. I call it that because it's a way to capture all kinds of different experiences using mixed media approaches. Today we're going to work with something that comes right out of an elementary school classroom, but is really terrific for adding a top layer of texture. It's called Crayon Resist. So for this technique, you really only need 3 or 4 things. First of all, you need a pen, something to give a base layer. I like these micron pens, and I use them in a variety of thicknesses. Secondly, you need some watercolors. I like a very inexpensive brand called Crayon. They have nice rich pigments for something so low cost. And the third is you need some crayons. My preference is to work with a white crayon. Some colored crayons will work fine, and these are really fancy beeswax crayons that are European. This technique works best on a thicker paper, so if you try it on a journal page and it's not working out as well, then work off your book on watercolor paper and then attach your watercolor paper to the book when you're finished. So to start this technique, it's important that you get down your ink first. So I'm just going to draw a quick area where I'm going to put in my text. So I've put in a journal entry here within the box. Now some of my students really appreciate having some direction to the journal entry. So what I'm going to recommend for this technique, which really is about resisting, I'm going to recommend the text be something about what would you do if you had absolutely no fear. I've got my text down. Now I'm going to take a white crayon and write the words "no fear" over the text. I know that's hard to see because it's white crayon on the watercolor paper. But watch what happens. If I take my watercolor now and just go over it, aha! This is what I mean about the elementary classroom and the magic. Look what's happening. The crayon is resisting the watercolor. And that word, or the 2 words, "no fear," come out right on top, obscuring the text below. But when this dries, you might be able to see a little bit through that white crayon. Another way that I use the crayon technique in my journals is not over text, but actually as part of an illustration. In this case, I drew some botanical images, leaves and stalks, and I put the white crayon on and then went over it with the green watercolor. I'll show it to you here. Here's my botanical illustration. I'm going to add some white crayon, just kind of randomly. By adding the white, it creates what are called highlights. And in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and add some other funny colors too. So I've got a colored crayon on this page. Now I'm going to take my watercolor paint and just paint over the ink to get that resist effect. Here you can see the finished image. Now I'll show you some examples from my journals. On this page you can see where I've done the initial drawing with the ink, and then I did the crayon, and then I added the watercolor with my text in the middle. On this page in my journal you can see where I didn't use any text, and actually I didn't even use ink. I just applied the crayon to get that kind of cloud effect and my watercolor over the white crayon. Here's another example where I didn't use text, but I used my ink to draw the initial shape, the crayon to add some texture to the page, and then the watercolor. Finally, here's a page that combines both. I put my text down first, I used ink to indicate some quick botanical areas, and then there's the white watercolor, the white crayon with the watercolor over it. One of the problems working in this particular journal is the page is fairly thin, so it's not as reliable a technique. This journal which is a moleskin journal, uses watercolor paper. And so here you can see I was able to get my text entry right on the page. I used one of those beeswax crayons on the outside, my white crayon over it, and then the watercolor. And finally, I wanted to show you how the aspen trees look. Here in Colorado we have these wonderful trees that have real strong highlights along one side usually, and then which I put in with crayon on top of the ink, and then I just use whatever colors I feel like for the watercolor. This is over 2 pages and my text is up top. So remember, with this technique it's ink, then crayon, then watercolor. 3 steps to get a really nice, rich, textural surface on the page. So that's it. The crayon resist technique is just great for adventure journaling because it lets you capture an experience and then add another layer on the top of a really rich textural surface. And the materials couldn't be easier and more elementary. Check out my website for more information.